From the outside, Jonathan Hayes had it all: unimaginable wealth, a palatial home in the hills, and a beautiful wife named Catherine, who stood by him through triumphs and failures. But behind closed doors, a single phone call shattered their picture-perfect life. It wasn't just any call. It was from the one woman Catherine never wanted to hear about. A mistress waiting in the wings, beckoning Jonathan to fulfill a promise he never should have made. He left in the dead of night without a word. Now days have turned into weeks. Catherine remains silent, and her silence is the loudest, most haunting sound Jonathan has ever heard. On a brisk autumn morning, sunlight spilled over the terraced gardens of the Hayes estate. Tall marble columns guarded the entrance to their mansion, a property so vast it even boasted a fountain specially designed by an award-winning Italian architect. Jonathan Hayes, a man in his mid-40s, had constructed his empire over 2 decades, starting with small-time real estate deals before scaling heights few believed were possible. His name frequently appeared in the society pages, but the public only saw the triumphant grin of a self-made millionaire. Behind that polished grin stood his wife of 15 years, Catherine. A gentle soul with an understated elegance, she was the glue that held the house together. At charity galas, Catherine rarely sought the spotlight. Instead, she often found small corners to talk to young, hopeful entrepreneurs or hold elderly patrons' hands. She was the definition of poise, but she was also a fortress keeping private pains hidden from all. That morning, Catherine was perched near the grand fireplace, stirring her tea in slow, pensive circles. Something about her quiet calm tugged at the air. Jonathan, fidgeting with a stack of documents before leaving for another high-stakes meeting, felt the tension thicken. She had not been herself for weeks: sleepless nights, forced smiles, absent-minded stares. Then came the phone call that changed everything. He answered in the hallway as Catherine watched. She recognized that look on his face in an instant: shame, guilt, and a rush of panic. Minutes later, Jonathan tucked the phone into his pocket and announced he had to go right now. He left behind the smell of aftershave and a single question hanging in the silence. Who had called, and why did it matter so much that Jonathan left without a proper goodbye? 3 hours before Jonathan's hurried departure, his phone had buzzed while he was still in bed. He'd woken with a start, verifying that Catherine was still asleep, and tiptoed into the hallway. On the other end of the line was Andrea Caldwell, a name he had tried to bury in his past. Andrea was not just any woman. She was the one who had once become his escape from the pressures of his marriage and the weight of his business. Her voice was smooth, tinged with desperation. "We need to talk, Jonathan. It's urgent." He felt his chest tighten. "Andrea, I told you this has to stop." "No, it doesn't. Not this time." He hung up, heart-pounding, sweaty palms still clutching the phone. Why now? Why, after so many months of silence, had she resurfaced with an urgent demand? Andrea's call was the thread that threatened to unravel Jonathan's perfectly woven life. The affair had been a closed chapter, sealed by mutual regret. He had sworn to himself and to Catherine, though she knew only fragments of the truth, that he would never see Andrea again. And yet, in that moment, he realized he couldn't pretend her hold on him was completely severed. During breakfast, Catherine's watchful eyes seemed to penetrate his every attempt at casual conversation. It was as though she could sense the ghost of Andrea lurking in the background. Then the call came again, mid-morning, and she overheard just enough to understand who was on the other end. Catherine's hand trembled slightly around her teacup, but she said nothing. Jonathan knew he should tell his wife. Instead, He slipped out of the house, following Andrea's pull, like a man stepping onto thin ice, hoping it wouldn't crack under the weight of his guilt. The day dragged on like a monotonous sequence of phone calls, boardroom agreements, and polite handshakes Jonathan barely remembered. His mind was adrift, anxiously awaiting the moment he would have to face Andrea. Several times he almost cancelled, but something about her voice felt like a loaded threat. Dusk arrived, and the cityscape turned amber. From his office window on the 38th floor, he could see the congested streets below each set of headlights merging into a glow that resembled a swarm of fireflies. He closed a deal with a smile that was all performance, then collected his briefcase and left before anyone could ask questions. His driver, Pierce, who'd been with the family for a decade, waited outside. Jonathan instructed Pierce to take him not to the estate, but to the Hotel Infinium, an upscale boutique renowned for its discreet clientele. The car ride passed in strained silence. Upon arrival, Andrea was already waiting in the lobby lounge, sipping a glass of Pinot Noir. Even in a fitted black dress, she stood out in the hushed elegance of the space. Her lips curled into a cryptic smile when Jonathan approached. He didn't return it. "Jonathan." She greeted him softly, her eyes flickering with a mix of longing and apprehension. "Andrea, this can't go on." "Catherine," he began. Andrea shook her head. "There's no Catherine right now. There's only me and you and a situation you can't run away from." He didn't realize the weight of that statement until much later. For now, her words melted into the low hum of piano music in the background. By the time Jonathan made it home, it was near midnight. Catherine was awake, but silent. She didn't ask where he had been, and he couldn't explain why he had left. It was easier to keep the truth buried. Days slipped into an uneasy routine. Catherine spoke to Jonathan only when necessary, polite exchanges about dinner times, the dog's vet appointment, or the weekend schedule. But there was no real conversation, no warmth, and certainly no genuine laughter. She didn't confront him, didn't demand an explanation. She simply observed from a distance. In the past, Jonathan would have greeted her silence with relief. He had always dreaded the possibility of an explosive argument, where Catherine's heartbreak might be laid bare in raw, punishing words. Now he realized that confrontation would have been preferable to the void that replaced any semblance of communication. He remembered the night he had proposed to her, years ago in front of the Trevi Fountain in Rome. She had beamed with such joy that strangers applauded and children clapped. He had promised to be her rock, to never let her face the harshness of the world alone. Yet here they were, living under the same roof, breathing the same air, but separated by an invisible wall of betrayal. Jonathan spent most nights in his home office, staring blankly at spreadsheets and investor reports. He had closed a major deal just last week, a property development partnership that earned him a personal meeting with Warren Buffett once. Normally, the triumph of such connections would energize him, but now each victory felt hollow. He considered pleading, apologizing, begging Catherine for any kind of reaction. But with each passing day, her silent treatment solidified into something unstoppable. A quiet storm that was unraveling Jonathan more effectively than any raised voice could. Flashbacks to the early days of his affair with Andrea haunted him during his long hours of restlessness. He had met Andrea at a corporate gala, not unlike the ones he and Catherine attended regularly for philanthropic purposes. Catherine was there that evening, but a migraine forced her to leave early. Jonathan stayed to maintain appearances and ended up sharing a glass of champagne with Andrea, a rising star in the luxury fashion industry. He was struck by Andrea's vivacious spirit. She was unapologetically ambitious, flirtatious, and her laughter filled every corner of the ballroom. At first, it was just a friendly conversation, but the second meeting, scheduled over coffee to discuss a potential collaboration, carried a spark neither could ignore. Jonathan told himself it was harmless. He was happily married. He had a son, Ethan, who was 13 at the time. In no way did he plan on risking his family, but Andrea's allure was magnetic. She challenged him, made him feel young, free. What started as a few stolen lunches evolved into clandestine weekend getaways. By the time he fully grasped the gravity of the betrayal, the damage was already done. Catherine confronted him with tears in her eyes, but also with a composed dignity that left him speechless. He promised it would end, and it did for a time. Yet the guilt never left him. It festered beneath every conversation, every affectionate gesture with Catherine, who had chosen to give him a second chance. Now, with Andrea's sudden reappearance, Jonathan feared the entire dark chapter was about to be ripped open again, and he had no idea how badly it would destroy the fragile peace he and Catherine had spent years building. Jonathan's world was not just golden chandeliers and gala dinners. Behind the lavish parties and magazine covers was a relentless, cutthroat environment. He managed multiple real estate ventures under the umbrella of Hayes and Morgan Holdings, co-founded with his college friend David Morgan. Together they built an empire, flipping distressed properties into five-star hotels, investing in high-rise condos, even branching out into commercial malls across Europe. Money had never been a problem, but it brought other forms of stress: lawsuits from disgruntled tenants, battles with city councils, and sometimes shady demands from opportunistic partners. Jonathan prided himself on staying above board, ensuring that Hayes and Morgan remained a respected name. However, with each new deal, the stakes seemed to grow higher, and the margin for moral compromise often widened. Catherine was always there to ground him. She managed a charity foundation named after her late mother, Grace Anderson, dedicated to providing housing solutions for homeless families. Through this foundation, Catherine poured her heart into giving back, a stark contrast to the ruthless pace of Jonathan's corporate battlefield. She reminded him of their roots. Both had grown up in modest households. She insisted that success should never outshine empathy. But success had come so fast, so strong, that Jonathan felt like a passenger on a runaway train. He rarely found the brakes, nor did he always want to. The affair with Andrea, he often rationalized, was a twisted response to the suffocating demands on him. A poor excuse, but one he clung to for a time. Now, as his empire kept growing, so did the cracks in his once stable marriage, and the hush that fell over his home threatened to erode not just his family's unity, but also his carefully curated reputation. Andrea was not the type of woman to knock politely and wait for permission to enter someone's life. She burst in, set her own terms, and demanded compliance. That was how she had conquered the fashion world, and it was how she had managed to ensnare Jonathan in the first place. One afternoon, Jonathan found himself in the corner booth of an upscale sushi restaurant, facing her across a bamboo-laden table. Andrea had requested the meeting, no demanded it. He had hoped it would be their final conversation, but the tension in the air suggested otherwise. "I'm done making excuses," she began, her voice low. "I'm done waiting in the background while you decide what scraps of time and affection you can spare." Jonathan rubbed his temples. "Andrea, we agreed." "It ended. We can't keep—" "It might have ended for you." She cut him off, leaning forward, her eyes ablaze. "But what if I told you I'm not just here for closure, that I have something that could destroy the empire you've built. He felt his heart skip a beat. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, email printouts, transaction details, and suspicious wire transfers. Jonathan's face went pale. Some of these transactions linked back to questionable deals he had made with a foreign construction firm years ago, deals that tiptoed the line of legality, enough to spark a scandal at the very least. Andrea's smile was razor-sharp. "Help me build my future, Jonathan, and maybe I'll forget to send these to the authorities, or worse yet, your precious Catherine." Jonathan realized this meeting was far from a mere emotional plea. Andrea had come armed with leverage blackmail, and he was staring at a ticking time bomb that threatened more than just his marriage. Back at the estate, Catherine carried on with her life in a methodical, almost mechanical way. She attended charity events, organized her foundation's latest housing initiative, and made sure Ethan was handling his university applications. At dinner, she'd inquire about Jonathan's day in the same polite tone she might use with a casual acquaintance. Yet she was no fool. Catherine sensed the dark cloud looming over her household. She knew something was brewing in Jonathan's life, something beyond just a case of midlife crisis. And if Andrea had indeed resurfaced, there was no telling what havoc she might wreak this time. Most telling of all was Jonathan's shift in demeanor. If the man was skilled at anything, it was compartmentalizing. But Catherine noticed subtle cracks, his restless pacing in the study, the way he stared at his phone, constantly expecting a call. And on the days Andrea must have summoned him, Catherine found the sheets on his side of the bed still cold by midnight. Yet she chose not to confront him. Not yet. She remembered her mother's words. Sometimes the loudest response is no response. She wanted to see how far Jonathan would go with his web of deceit. She wanted to see if he would muster the courage to tell her the truth unprompted. That night, she sat in front of their bedroom mirror, brushing her hair in long, slow strokes. Her reflection betrayed no anger, only a resigned determination. She was waiting, listening, a statue carved out of heartbreak and quiet strength. If Jonathan thought her silence was a mere act of submission, he had no idea what was coming next. Jonathan felt trapped in a labyrinth of his own making. The blackmail Andrea dangled over his head was potent enough to end not only his marriage, but also his professional empire. With the real estate market so tightly monitored and public trust crucial to investors, any hint of illegal dealings or off-the-record payouts would spark a media firestorm. He tried to stay ahead of the problem, calling in favors from old friends in legal circles. One of them, Robert Klein, had once worked as an advisor on Bill Gates's philanthropic initiatives. Robert was sharp, well-connected, and discreet. Over whiskey one evening in Jonathan's private lounge, he laid out the facts. If she goes public, you're in for a long, ugly battle. Even if you beat the charges, your name will be smeared in the headlines for years. Jonathan's gaze was distant, his knuckles white from gripping the armrest. I can't let that happen, Robert. I built this company from scratch. My family can't go through that kind of public scandal. And Catherine, Robert asked gently. Jonathan took a slow breath. She's already suffering. I need to fix this before it destroys everything. But fix it how Andrea demanded significant financial backing for a venture she wanted to start, a high-end fashion line with an international footprint. She wanted seed money in the tens of millions, a ridiculous ask, even for Jonathan. Yet the alternative was far worse. In the quiet corners of his estate, he'd stare at family portraits. Catherine's beaming smile, Ethan's carefree grin, and his guilt would cut him to the core. The next morning, he made a decision that compromised what little remained of his integrity. He would pay Andrea buying time to figure out an escape route from the trap he had fallen into. The first inkling that something was amiss in the Hayes empire emerged during a routine board meeting at Hayes and Morgan Holdings. David Morgan, co-founder and Jonathan's oldest friend, had noticed unexplained large transfers in the corporate accounts. At first he assumed they were for some hush-hush property acquisition. Jonathan was known to keep certain deals close to the vest, but the amounts were staggering, and there was no accompanying paper trail. David confronted Jonathan in his office after everyone else had gone home for the day. "What's going on, John?" "We don't make moves like this without consulting each other. We've never kept secrets until now." Jonathan loosened his tie, feigning nonchalance. "Just a side project. I'm exploring a new opportunity." "Don't lie to me." David interrupted, his voice grim. "I've been your partner for 20 years. You think I can't see what's happening? You're diverting funds to something off the books. If someone audits us, we're both in serious trouble." Jonathan's shoulders sagged. The facade of confidence he'd maintained cracked under David's interrogation. But he couldn't tell David the whole truth. "Look, trust me, I'm handling it. It's personal. I'll pay the company back." David studied him for a moment. Frustration etched into his features. "I'm your friend, Jonathan, not just your business partner. Whatever trouble you're in, I can help. But I need to know what it is. Don't shut me out." Jonathan wanted to confess everything: the affair, Andrea's blackmail, his crumbling marriage. But the words stuck in his throat. David had met Catherine in college, introduced Jonathan to her, had stood as best man at their wedding. How could Jonathan admit he was on the brink of destroying everything David had helped him build? "I'll fix it," he said, simply, hoping his voice didn't betray the fear quivering inside. The tension at Hayes and Morgan mirrored the tension at the Hayes estate. Catherine continued to maintain her stoic silence, while Jonathan grew increasingly desperate to keep up appearances. Ethan, now 19. Home for a brief break from his college campus tours, sensed the undercurrents. He found it strange that neither of his parents was truly present. His mother quietly withdrawn, his father distracted and jumpy. One evening, Ethan asked Catherine if everything was okay. She mustered a small smile. "Don't worry, darling. Focus on your studies and your future." Her tone told him that further questions would lead nowhere. Later he approached Jonathan in the study. Jonathan was reviewing more documents related to Andrea's demands, the lines of worry clearly etched on his face. Seeing Ethan, he quickly closed the folder. "Hey, kiddo. You okay?" "That's what I came to ask you," Ethan replied, eyebrows furrowed. "Everything feels off." Jonathan swallowed hard, trying to placate his son. "Your mother and I are fine. Just a rough patch at work. You know how businesses can be." He patted Ethan's shoulder, forcing a grin he didn't feel. But the teenager wasn't convinced. He saw the darkness in his father's eyes. After Ethan went to bed, Jonathan sat alone in the living room. Light from the crystal chandelier cast shifting patterns on the marble floor. The house was too big, too quiet, the grandeur mocking him. It felt like a palace-turned-prison. He reached for the family album on the coffee table, pages of happier times. A smiling Catherine holding a toddler, Ethan at the beach, a younger Jonathan, celebrating their first $1 million deal, stared back at him. He realized that if he didn't find a way out soon, those memories would be all that remained of a once loving family. Unbeknownst to Jonathan, Catherine was far from idle during her weeks of silence. She had always been a patient observer, and she used her understated composure to her advantage. While Jonathan was preoccupied with Andrea's blackmail and covert transactions, Catherine quietly hired a private investigator named Simone Keyes, a trusted contact from her charity network, who specialized in discreet inquiries for battered women and their children. Catherine intended to gather facts before deciding her next step. She wanted to know if Andrea truly was involved again, and if so, how deep the betrayal ran this time. She suspected there was more than mere adultery in play. Jonathan's frantic behavior signaled a problem that extended beyond romance. Simone's reports came in bits and pieces. First sightings of Jonathan, meeting Andrea at various upscale locales, restaurants, lounges, and once at the Hotel Infinium. Next came financial data gleaned from leaked sources. Catherine felt her stomach twist when she saw the sums involved. Andrea's demands clearly weren't for hush money alone. They pointed to something bigger, more sinister. Catherine took the news with a heavy heart, but also a sense of resolve. She would not confront Jonathan with accusations until she had the full story. Instead, she began to make quiet preparations on visiting her personal assets, adjusting the foundation's board structure, and updating her legal documents. It wasn't about retaliation. It was about ensuring she wouldn't be left powerless if Jonathan's house of cards came tumbling down. She refused to be a victim. If the day came that she needed to leave, she would do so with her dignity and her charity's integrity intact. Her mother had always taught her, in times of crisis, plan carefully and act decisively. Catherine intended to do just that. Andrea, emboldened by the initial transfers she had extorted from Jonathan, escalated her demands. She wanted not only financial backing, but also public endorsement, an invitation to high-profile events where Jonathan could introduce her as a business associate. In her eyes, that would lend her fashion label the credibility she craved. Jonathan balked at the idea. Appearing in public with Andrea would be social suicide for him and an explicit admission of their connection. But Andrea's threats were growing bolder. She alluded to a stash of incriminating documents, including emails that indicated more than financial improprieties, perhaps evidence that Jonathan had used inside information to outmaneuver competitors. One evening in the penthouse suite of a 5-star hotel, Andrea laid out her ultimatum. "I want a partnership contract signed and a public announcement by next month. If you don't comply, I'll unleash every document I have." Her eyes burned with ambition. The lines of her designer dress and the glint in her jewelry spoke volumes about her hunger for luxury, power, and validation. Jonathan felt nauseous, pinned to the wall by the sheer weight of her demands. "I can't just wave a wand and make it happen," he protested. "I have shareholders. I have a family. You're asking me to destroy my reputation in the open." Andrea leaned closer. "Your reputation, Jonathan, it's already on the line. The question is whether you want to control the narrative or let it devour you." She placed a manicured hand gently on his lapel. "I have a vision for my brand. We both know you can make it happen. Let's stop pretending you're not going to cave." After she left, Jonathan slumped into a chair, sweat beading on his forehead. 1 month. He had 30 days before Andrea detonated the bomb that could ruin him. As pressure mounted, Jonathan found an unexpected ear in his longtime housekeeper, Rosa Martinez. Rosa had served the Hayes family for nearly a decade. She was a discreet figure in the household, managing staff schedules, organizing dinner parties, and ensuring the mansion ran like a well-oiled machine. One late night, Jonathan wandered into the kitchen in search of something to calm his nerves. He found Rosa cleaning up the scent of lavender and dish soap filling the air, usually reserved. Rosa caught the haunted look in Jonathan's eyes. "Senor Hayes," she said softly. "Are you all right?" He paused, not knowing why. He felt compelled to confide in her. Maybe because she was there and he had no one else he could trust without risking exposure. "I've made a mess of things, Rosa," he admitted, voice quivering. "A terrible mess that I might not be able to fix." Rosa set aside her cloth and looked at him with gentle concern. She knew nothing of the details, but she had seen the tension between Jonathan and Catherine, felt the heavy atmosphere permeating the house. "Sometimes it helps to speak with the ones we love," she offered, carefully choosing her words. "Silence can become a burden no one can carry alone." Jonathan exhaled sharply, letting the weight of her words sink in. Rosa, with her unwavering loyalty to the family, had given him a glimpse of clarity. He felt a flicker of courage, the smallest ember of hope. If he was to save his marriage, if there was any redemption left for him, he would need to break his own silence, even if Catherine refused to break hers. But the question remained. Could he speak the truth before the lies suffocated them both? Just when Jonathan thought he had a handle on Andrea's ultimatum, another complication arose. A stranger claiming to be a private investigator working for Andrea contacted him via an untraceable number. The man's voice was electronically distorted, but the message was clear. "We have evidence you wouldn't want to see the light of day. Keep the payments flowing." Alarm bells went off in Jonathan's mind. Andrea had never mentioned a partner in her blackmail scheme. Could she be collaborating with another entity? Or had her stolen documents fallen into the wrong hands? Desperate for answers, Jonathan confronted Andrea the next day in a quiet corner of a public park, out of earshot of potential eavesdroppers. She seemed genuinely startled by the accusation. "I didn't hire anyone, Jonathan. If someone's blackmailing you, it's not me or anyone I know." Her indignant expression suggested she was either an excellent actress or truly in the dark. The call itself was vague, but threatening talk of hidden recordings, financial logs, and even personal videos that could tarnish Jonathan's image if released. Jonathan realized he might be dealing with opportunistic criminals who stumbled on Andrea's incriminating files or managed to intercept her communications. Now he found himself ensnared in a double web of blackmail, Andrea on one side, these unknown figures on the other. Worst of all, each demanded something different. Andrea craved legitimacy and financial support, while the strangers wanted outright extortion. Jonathan had to figure out which threat posed the greatest immediate danger, or he risked losing everything he had worked for. Amid this turmoil, Catherine's unwavering silence felt even more ominous. He had lost control not just of his marriage, but of the entire narrative. It was as though his life was a stage, and everyone else was writing the script. The chandelier above Catherine's desk sparkled with midday light as she flipped through a thick stack of documents, Simone Key's latest report. Printed pages, receipts, timestamps, and surveillance photos were neatly tabbed and annotated. It was all there. Jonathan's late-night meetings with Andrea, the payments made from shell accounts, one particularly damning photo, the two of them exiting a hotel lobby just after midnight. Andrea's hand brushing his jacket lapel, Jonathan's eyes scanning nervously for bystanders. Catherine stared at the image without blinking. Her heart ached, but it didn't tremble. She had seen enough. This wasn't a detour. This was a pattern, a rot deep within the roots of her marriage. And yet she didn't rage. She didn't cry. Her response, as always, was measured, deliberate. For weeks, she had held her silence not out of passivity, but precision. Now it was time to act. She placed the report in a drawer and unlocked a hidden cabinet built into the antique desk. Inside were legal files, her personal holdings, property, deeds, trust documents, and a copy of the foundation's bylaws. She reviewed each one, with meticulous care. Catherine had spent years nurturing Grace House Foundation, named after her mother. The charity had grown from a small neighborhood initiative into a national non-profit. She'd raised funds, cultivated partnerships, and personally mentored hundreds of women escaping domestic instability. That foundation, her life's work, had to remain untouched by Jonathan's scandal. Step 1. Protect the foundation. She scheduled an emergency board vote to restructure its leadership. Though she would remain president, she distributed legal authority across 3 trustees. Should anything happen to her financially, the foundation would remain intact, autonomous, untouchable. Step 2. Protect herself. She gathered documentation, proving her independent ownership of key assets. 2 properties in her maiden name, separate bank accounts established before marriage, and an untouched inheritance from her grandmother. She quietly contacted a financial advisor and set up a trust. It wasn't about divorce. Not yet. It was about survival. Catherine refused to become collateral damage in Jonathan's spiral. Step 3. Prepare for confrontation. She still didn't know the full extent of Andrea's grip on Jonathan, but Simone's last update mentioned a troubling pattern: encrypted emails being forwarded to unknown parties. Catherine's instincts told her more players were involved now, possibly criminal ones. She sipped her tea, letting its warmth steady her thoughts. Her fingers moved over the desk's surface, pausing at an old framed photo of her and Jonathan, taken on their 10th anniversary in Venice. They were laughing, young, radiant, unaware of the cracks forming just beneath the surface. She didn't hate him, not completely. But she didn't trust him either, and trust was the currency she could no longer afford to spend. The door creaked slightly behind her, but she didn't turn. It was Rosa, the housekeeper, quietly setting down a tray. "Thank you," Catherine said softly. Rosa hesitated. "Everything okay, Signora?" Catherine looked up, her expression unreadable. "Not yet," she replied. "But it will be." She watched Rosa retreat, then turned back to her files. There was still more to do, still more to secure. She wasn't preparing for war, not quite. But she was preparing for impact. And when the moment came, Catherine Harrington Hayes would not be the one left broken. Ethan Hayes wasn't snooping, at least not intentionally. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon, and the mansion had taken on the hollow stillness of a home trying to hold itself together. With both parents distant and preoccupied, Ethan had retreated to his room to finish a university application essay. But his laptop charger had vanished. After turning his room upside down, he remembered seeing a spare one in his father's study weeks ago. The study was usually off-limits, unless Jonathan was present, but the door stood ajar now, and the house was silent. With a quick glance down the hallway to make sure no one was around, Ethan stepped inside. The room was as pristine as always. Books-aligned desk, polished, everything in its place. He scanned the side drawers for the charger, but found only a mess of old business cards, staplers, and pens. Then beneath a legal pad, he spotted something strange. A small flash drive tucked into a slim envelope marked only with the initials AC. Curiosity flickered. Ethan hesitated. He knew he shouldn't. But something about the initials triggered a memory. A woman's name spoken in anger years ago, in a muffled argument he wasn't meant to overhear. Andrea Caldwell. He took the flash drive and slipped it into his pocket. Back in his room with his door locked and headphones plugged in to mask any noise, Ethan opened the drive on his laptop. What he found made his stomach twist into knots. Hundreds of files. There were emails between his father and Andrea, wire transfers labeled under vague project names, hotel receipts, travel logs, cryptic notes referring to settlements and media mitigation. Ethan didn't fully understand the legal language or the financial maneuvering, but he understood one thing clearly. His father had been hiding something massive. More than an affair. More than a lie. There were documents hinting at blackmail, legal threats, strategic payments made through offshore accounts, and all of it traced back to Andrea. Ethan leaned back in his chair, heart pounding, his childhood idol. The man who taught him about responsibility, ambition, and integrity was now someone he barely recognized. It was like finding a crack in a marble statue and realizing it had been hollow all along. He stared at the drive. What do I do with this? Telling his father was out of the question. Jonathan had grown cold and defensive. Approaching his mother was even harder. Catherine floated through the house like a phantom. Her silences weighted with meaning Ethan couldn't quite decipher, and yet something in him knew she already suspected. Maybe not the full extent, but something. The way she looked at Jonathan during dinner. The quiet, clipped responses, the way she never asked where he went late at night. Ethan carefully removed the drive and slid it into a book on his shelf, tucking it between pages of a forgotten thriller novel. He knew this wasn't just a secret, it was a bomb. One that had already begun to tick. For now he would wait. Observe. But one thing was certain, the myth of his father had shattered. And Ethan wasn't sure yet if he wanted to expose what he'd found or protect the only version of his family he still believed in. The sky outside the Hayes estate was velvet black by the time Jonathan stumbled through the front doors. The storm inside him matched the weather, restless, chaotic, loud. He had stopped at a bar after another heated meeting with Andrea, nursing one too many bourbons in a desperate attempt to muffle the ticking time bomb of guilt that had followed him for weeks. He hadn't expected Catherine to be awake. Yet there she was, seated in the sitting room, with a book open in her lap, the fire casting a warm flicker against her high cheekbones. She looked ethereal, untouchable, as if she had transcended the drama he had brought into their lives. Jonathan froze, still gripping the front door handle like he was debating escape. But there was no turning back. Not anymore. "I need to talk to you," he said, softly, voice frayed by alcohol and dread. Catherine didn't answer. She slowly closed the book and set it aside. Her fingers delicate, precise. Her eyes met his, calm and unblinking. She didn't beckon. She didn't bristle. She simply waited. Jonathan walked in unsteadily, collapsing onto the opposite armchair. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, rubbing his face like he could somehow erase everything that had happened. "I messed up." He began the words, tasting like acid. Still, she said nothing. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't plan for any of this. Andrea, she came back into my life, and I tried to shut it down. I did. But then she started threatening me. She has documents, things from my past, emails, wire transfers. She's blackmailing me." A long silence stretched between them. The only sound was the soft crackle of the fire. "She's not the only one," he added, voice cracking. "Someone else got hold of her files. They're demanding money too. I'm trapped, Catherine." She tilted her head slightly, studying him, like a surgeon about to make an incision. "I've spent weeks trying to fix it, trying to keep it from exploding," he continued. "And all this time, you've been here, silent, watching me fall apart. Why didn't you ask? Why didn't you confront me?" She finally spoke, her voice quiet, but razor sharp. Because I wanted to see if you would choose the truth on your own. Jonathan's chest tightened. And you didn't, she added, eyes glinting with disappointment. You waited until the walls were caving in and the headlines were coming for you. That's not a confession, Jonathan. That's survival. He felt the sting of her words more deeply than any slap. He reached out, but she didn't move. I didn't want to lose you, he whispered. You already did, she replied. He sank back, defeated. Is there anything left for us? She rose from her seat with regal grace. That depends on whether you start telling the whole truth, not because you're cornered, but because you finally respect me enough to stop lying. She walked toward the hallway, stopping briefly beside him. You should sleep. Tomorrow's storm is coming, and you'll need clarity. Then she left him in the dim room, the firelight dancing over the ruins of his pride. For the first time, in a long time, Jonathan wasn't sure if his next move would save anything or only confirm that he'd already lost it all. It was a grey, overcast afternoon when Catherine decided it was time to meet Andrea face to face. No more guessing, no more filtered truths from Jonathan. She needed to look the woman who had threatened her marriage, her family, and her name in the eye, and she wanted to do it on her own terms. I want to meet her, Catherine had told Jonathan that morning, in a tone so calm it frightened him more than any outburst could have. Jonathan's reaction was immediate. Catherine, that's not necessary. She raised a single brow. It's necessary to me. He nodded slowly, realizing resistance would only make things worse. Catherine was no longer in waiting mode. She was in control. Later that day, they arranged a private lunch at a quiet French bistro on the outskirts of the city, one Catherine had often used for discreet charity donor meetings, neutral ground, elegant but secluded. Andrea arrived first. She wore a tailored black blazer over a silk blouse, every detail of her outfit curated to radiate power. But even her high heels couldn't disguise the slight stiffness in her stride as she spotted Catherine waiting at a corner table by the window. Catherine greeted her with a composed nod. Andrea. Mrs. Hayes. Andrea returned, sitting down slowly. Catherine, she corrected. No need for pretense today. Andrea's lips twitched into a smirk. Fair enough. A tense silence settled over the table as the waiter brought water and menus neither of them touched. Finally, Catherine leaned forward. I didn't come here to fight, she began. I came here to ask why. Why take this path? Blackmail, manipulation, financial extortion. You had other options. Andrea's gaze didn't waver. Did I? She said coolly. Because from where I sat, I was discarded. Tossed aside so Jonathan could go back to his picture-perfect life. He got to start over. I didn't. You made your choices, Catherine replied, her tone sharp but not cruel. You knew he was married. You knew there was a family involved. Andrea scoffed. I also knew he was miserable. And when he told me it was over, I accepted it. For a while. But then I saw him again on TV, at events smiling like nothing ever happened, and I realized men like Jonathan never pay the price unless someone makes them. Catherine's expression didn't change, but her voice dropped a register. So that's what this is about. Vengeance. Andrea leaned back in her chair. No, it's about leverage. It's about ensuring I get something out of the years I wasted on him. You got time. You got memories. And now you want a legacy funded by blackmail. Andrea's smile faltered for the first time. Call it whatever you want. I'm getting what I deserve. No, Catherine said, evenly standing. You're not. What you deserve is a life free of bitterness. What you deserve is to move on. Build something real, not something stitched together from someone else's ruin. Andrea rose too. You sound noble, Catherine, but you're still the wife who got everything. And you're still the woman who settled for scraps and called it empowerment, Catherine said, her voice cutting with elegance. This conversation is over. With that, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Andrea standing alone, staring at the water glasses at the untouched menus, and the reflection of a woman who had tried to win with sabotage. It was not a victory for Catherine, but it was a reclaiming of power. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She didn't need to. Her presence had said enough, and as she stepped into the waiting car, Jonathan looked at her with something close to reverence and a fear that she might be preparing to leave him behind entirely. The reckoning came not with a bang, but with a whisper, an anonymous email quietly forwarded to a prominent investigative journalist at the Business Ledger. Attached were scanned documents, financial records, and threads of correspondence so damning they needed no dramatic flourish. Within hours, the story hit the wire. Illegal dealings uncovered at Hayes & Morgan Holdings emails. Suggest. Years of secret payouts. Backdoor transfers. Jonathan Hayes stared blankly at the headline glowing on his phone screen. He was in the middle of a conference call when it broke, and the moment he read the alert, his voice caught. Panic rose like boss in his throat. The fallout was immediate. Phone calls from alarmed board members harangued non-stop. Investors demanded answers. A red banner flashed across financial news networks, showing Hayes & Morgan's stock plummeting by the hour. Within a single afternoon, over $180 million in market value evaporated. David Morgan, his business partner and once trusted friend, stormed into Jonathan's office. "What the hell is this?" he thundered, slamming a printed copy of the article onto the desk. "You said it was personal, something you'd fix. You didn't say it was criminal." Jonathan, pale and shaken, tried to form words. "I didn't know it would come to this. The emails, they weren't supposed to surface. But they did." David snapped. "And now our entire company is bleeding out because you couldn't keep your secrets buried." Across town, Catherine watched the news coverage unfold from the sitting room of the mansion's East Wing. The estate had become a battlefield of silence and shattered trust. She hadn't spoken to Jonathan in days, and now, as she listened to financial analysts dissect her husband's downfall, she felt both heartbreak and vindication rise inside her. She didn't gloat. She didn't cry. She simply stood and gathered her things. That evening, when Jonathan returned home, he found her in the living room. The lights low, the air heavy with finality. Catherine sat with her legs crossed, a single suitcase by her side. "I've spoken with my attorneys," she said calmly, not bothering to look up as he entered. "The foundation is secure. Ethan is staying with me. We'll be moving into the townhouse temporarily. You'll remain here until further notice." Jonathan swallowed hard. "Catherine, please. Don't go. We can—" She looked up at him, then eyes shimmering but dry. "You broke us, Jonathan. You took everything we built. Trust, family, even dignity, and gambled it for someone who blackmailed you into submission." His voice cracked. "I never meant to." "You did it anyway," she interrupted softly. "Intent doesn't undo betrayal." He dropped to his knees in front of her, the weight of the day finally crashing down. "Tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix this. I'll do anything." Catherine looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then with steady grace, she rose from her seat and picked up her suitcase. "That's up to you," she said. "But I won't be your audience while you figure it out." She walked past him, leaving only the scent of her perfume and the sound of her heels against the marble. The door clicked shut behind her. Jonathan remained kneeling in the center of the room, surrounded by grandeur that now felt like a mausoleum. Outside, reporters swarmed the front gates. His empire, his marriage, and his carefully crafted identity were all unraveling. And through it all, Catherine's silence echoed louder than any condemnation ever could. In the following months, Jonathan faced a barrage of legal scrutiny. High-profile attorneys were hired, settlements were negotiated, and hush money was offered to keep the more damning pieces of evidence out of public view. The company's board forced him to step down temporarily as CEO while an internal investigation was launched. David Morgan, furious and hurt nonetheless, stepped in to stabilize the ship, hoping to salvage the name they had built from scratch. The scandal rippled through the real estate world, making Jonathan a cautionary tale about mixing personal failings with business dealings. Catherine, meanwhile, focused on expanding her foundation, leveraging the media attention to highlight her charitable work. She refused to capitalize on Jonathan's downfall, but nor did she shield him from it. She maintained her dignity, continuing to operate as the poised, compassionate woman the public had always known. Andrea tried to salvage her own ambitions in the chaos, but her demands became moot once the blackmailers released the documents. She quietly disappeared from the social scene. Rumors suggesting she had retreated to Europe to escape the legal labyrinth she had helped create. Ethan, bruised by the ordeal, returned to his studies, deciding to major in business ethics, a choice that stirred a mix of guilt and pride in Jonathan. Slowly, father and son began to repair their bond, finding common ground in the lessons learned from Jonathan's errors. As for Jonathan and Catherine, their relationship hovered in a state of limbo. Divorce papers remained unsigned, but they lived separate lives within the same estate. On rare evenings, they'd share a quiet dinner, exchanging polite, almost friendly words. It wasn't forgiveness, at least not yet. But perhaps it was the seed of something that might bloom again one day under the right conditions. Thank you for journeying through this whirlwind of ambition, betrayal, and a silence that echoed louder than any confrontation could. If this story gripped you from start to finish, imagine the chapters yet unwritten. Could Jonathan and Catherine mend their fractured trust, or is all lost beneath the weight of broken vows and corporate scandal? Only time will tell if regret can blossom into redemption. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale, please give this video a like, share it with fellow story lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that dive into the human heart with all its flaws and hopes. By engaging with our content, you help us continue spinning tales that challenge, entertain, and inspire. Stay tuned for the next gripping journey, because every secret, every silence, and every confession has a story worth telling. Thank you for watching.